This week in an X-Files classic, Child's Play star Brad DeWolf makes a cameo appearance as one of the most terrifying X-Files villains of the week ever, Luther Boggs, as Scully loses her father in dramatic fashion and is pulled into Boggs's mind games in what may or may not be a supernatural premonition that he has. Basically, the episode goes all very Silence of the Lambs, where Boggs works opposite Scully, predicting how and when the next attack by a local serial killer will take place. But for once, it's Mulder who is skeptical of this, as he believes that Boggs is a phony and is playing on Scully's vulnerabilities, still, of course, fragile from the loss of her dad. This is a very personal, Scully-driven episode. That's this week on the X-Files. Let's get into it. It's Beyond the Sea. And so in the opening scene we meet the Scully family. Around the holidays they get together and we get a real sense of just some of the details and some of the tensions between Scully and her father in particular, as he seems to disapprove of her choice of career because of his Navy background. I think the indication is anyway that he wanted her to take part in that career, but they basically have a little moment, but they don't go as far as to say, we love each other, that sort of thing. The mother is a lot more sympathetic and supportive, but they do have a nice little moment where she salutes him and he calls her Starbucks, a little nickname taken from obviously Moby Dick. But we immediately get a sense of the sort of dynamic the family has, it's a really great introduction to the Scully family, and I think there's some really good and interesting stuff without them throughout the show. Of course, the big shot reveal is that the father, as soon as they've introduced him, he's then killed off. It cuts to later on. Scully's asleep in front of the TV. She gets a phone call from her mother, Dana. Your father's gone. And what happens is Scully actually sees her father. He appears to her moments before the telephone call. But it's almost like a dream, and then she snaps out of it with the telephone. And I think it's one of those that plays on something which is quite realistic. A lot of people say that, they kind of get an image of, a loved one who's about to die or has died, and it's moments before they hear them that that's actually happened. And I think this episode plays into Scully's beliefs as well, her religious beliefs. So I think that's definitely a factor behind this choice. It's just a really striking choice and a great way to, cut to the credits. And the next scene with Mulder and Scully is just tremendous. The little touch of him when she sees she's coming to work. He calls her Dana and just touches her on the cheek. It's really humane and fragile. And another nice touch about that scene is that actually Scully enters the office by making a little gag. So it's almost that sort of banter where she's doing it to mask how much she's suffering, her grieving, and trying to hide that, trying to keep things light. But Mulder immediately, is sympathetic and says to her, well, what you should really take some time off, really. And Scully, very focused, very sort of tunnel vision, just says, I want to keep working. And I think that's going to become crucial in the episode, because obviously it's one of those choices where if Scully took Mulder's advice and didn't coming to work, took a few days, then that actually would have prevented her from really getting in deep in this episode. But of course, we wouldn't have had the episode. So Mulder introduces Scully to the case of the week, which involves the local serial killer, and that it's Luther Boggs, played by the wonderful Brad Dourif, who's the guest star of the week, who claims that he has information on the serial killer and where he will strike next and where he's holding these kids. We see this scene where he basically tricks them. He disguises himself as a police officer and then attacks them and kidnaps them. And this whole episode is very Silence of the Lambs. I've probably mentioned before how Scully has a Khalees Starling type feel to her, and how they went for that more, grounded, intense but smart sort of FBI style agent, how they were influenced by Silence of the Lambs. And the way this episode plays out, with the focus being on Scully and her back and forth with Boggs, actually sort of backs that up. And obviously at this point I have to talk about just how good Brad Dourif is. He really takes this role and runs with it. He really grabs the role by the balls. He's just so intense and theatrical, but so subtle in these many different variations of these personas that are supposedly coming to him, where at one point he claims to be channeling Scully's father, and they use Beyond the Sea, the theme, because what happens is before they go and see Boggs for the first time, we see the funeral and it's out at sea and the family's there, and there's some dispute between Scully and her mother over, is this really what he wants? But it sort of all ties in, because of course we had the whole Starbuck thing with Scully as well, her nickname, and we see certain regrets, certain questions that tends to happen when you lose family members, especially unexpectedly like this, because the father, he isn't really that old. He's sort of 50s, maybe early 60s at the most. And because him and Scully obviously had quite a tense relationship towards the end, there is those question marks. One thing I picked up on, I think, is then it's almost like he was so hell-bent and so career-focused as well, and probably was never around that often when Scully grew up. So it's almost like history repeating itself. And obviously different with Scully, because she doesn't have, at this point, children to look after, but I guess you can maybe see some of her career-driven mentality that she maybe got from her father. But the episode definitely paints a very real, vivid picture of grief and the certain regrets or questions you might have. But yeah, they use that Beyond the Sea theme. I love it how they use it as a straight sort of, just this kind of touching little theme at the funeral, because apparently it's the theme that was playing the night him and Dana's mother met, but then how it's used as something a lot more sinister and twisted when Boggs uses it, and that's how he reveals to Scully. It's just this little moment as Scully's leaving the prison cell that he seems to have these, mental powers, where he's psychic and he knows what happened to the father, and he starts singing the theme, and it's almost like that thing that they do sometimes in films, like in Blue Velvet with Only in Dreams, where they will take a piece of music which is meant to be quite romantic and, gentle, and they twist it around into something haunting and sinister. So this is a classic example, and that scene really hits you, and the whole DeWitt performance, he is just so full on scary, his physical features and just his voices, as I said, these subtle mannerisms. He's absolutely creepy, but somehow he makes it very human and tense and kind of grounds it as well. It's a really tour de force, a really amazing performance from him, a great guest star. They could not have cast him any better. I know they paid quite a lot of money for him, and he was worth every penny probably. He just knocks it out the park, and the scenes between him and Scully are just so intense, so interesting. But yeah, I mean, at first Scully takes this information on because there's this scene where Mulder, who is skeptical of Boggs in this episode, it's actually, that's another thing they do. It's like the role reversal because it's actually Mulder who's the skeptic because he knows Boggs. Previously, he's the one who put him in prison. And this is, of course, the week Boggs is going to be executed, although there was a previous time where he was supposed to be executed and he got a reprieve. But Mulder is very skeptical. He doesn't believe that Boggs is legit, and he just thinks because it's the week he's supposed to go to the chair, then he's using this to try and get out of going to the chair once again. So they do this really cool role reversal where it's actually Scully who gets sucked into this Boggs idea, this plot, and she actually believes, and Mulder is the skeptic. And it's just brilliant because I think it adds layers to Mulder because it shows that he can actually be open-minded and he can actually feel the opposite and not necessarily believe every sort of supernatural theory that gets put to him. And likewise, it shows a different side to Scully. And I think it's key that they wait sort of. This is the 13th episode of the show now, so they wait this long. Because if it was like episode 4 or something, you say, yeah, this is way too soon for her to believe in this stuff. But likewise, I think there's questionable things on both ends with Mulder and Scully because you might question him that at times he's too skeptical in the episode, he's too not willing to believe Boggs, maybe because he put him away and because there's just, he hates the guy basically. There's this, not exactly rivalry, but there's probably this thing between them because Mulder put him away and maybe Mulder is too steadfast in his belief. But on the other end, you could sort of say that Scully is drawn in because of what's happened to her father and because of how personal this is, and but obviously there's to her, at least with Boggs singing the song and everything, there is strong evidence that he probably is telling the truth. But it's a great role reversal, as I said. It's really compelling to watch, and it does become the Scully episode because the details that Boggs gives them, because Mulder basically tricks him when he gives them, because the whole deal is that Boggs wants a piece of fabric from the clothes of one of the victims from the crime scene to use to get like a reading on where they're likely to be held. And he then comes out with all this stuff and the description, and Mulder sort of calls his bluff because he's like, I ripped this off my baseball shirt, basically. It's a great scene because, again, it shows Mulder really using his smarts to sort of outwit Boggs kind of thing. I guess one interesting thing about that is that would he have done that if he was believing in what Boggs was saying? Maybe because he went in believing that Boggs was full of it, then he decided to pull that. Or it might have just been something he did, something he thought, well, I'm going to test this guy, let's see if he's telling the truth. So Mulder kind of calls his bluff, but Scully then, because of what happens with Boggs as she's leaving, decides that, yeah, she's going to investigate this. So she actually follows up on his description, this old abandoned warehouse. And when she goes there, and it's another very sort of creepy scene, and she actually lies about it in her police report where they got the information, or how she got the information. And it's basically that she doesn't want to actually come out and say that she believes, or that's Mulder's theory when they talk about it later on. And I think, as I said earlier, a theme of the episode is to do with Scully's faith and belief. So that actually sort of goes along with this idea of, does she believe in this sort of thing? So, her religious beliefs actually is I think like a metaphor for, her. Does she believe it in Boggs and what he's saying, that sort of thing. But yeah, what happens is halfway through this episode, when they go to this factory, Mulder is actually sidelined. When they try to rescue the two teenagers, he's knocked out. He's sort of shot at one point and hospitalized. So you get this really interesting dynamic where Scully becomes the lead in the episode in a way, and it becomes more her and Boggs, and then you get the occasional scene with Mulder, who's in the hospital, and they talk, but his whole thing is don't believe in Boggs, basically. And they have a really interesting chat about believing, and Scully says, well, I thought you would be pleased that I believe, and yeah, Mulder basically spells out to her that, you can be duped in life, and that goes for your father, and that goes for Boggs, sort of thing. And he just makes it clear to him that what Boggs, or to Scully, sorry, what Boggs is up to, and don't get hooked into him, sort of what he's doing, sort of thing. So it's a really interesting part of the episode, and I love, as I said, the role reversal stuff, but all the stuff with Scully and Boggs is fantastic, where he's talking about, if she helps him, if she gets him a deal that can kind of stop him from going to death row, basically, or stop him from being executed, then he not only help her with the case, but a message from her dad from the grave, and he keeps playing with her throughout the episode, and really sort of sinister and maniacal, and there's some really scary stuff in this episode. It's one of the most atmospheric and chilling episodes I've seen of the X-Files. I think that's what makes it so good, on top of the great acting and the great writing, and the whole atmosphere is there, and the direction really sort of draws you in. There's some great stuff with Scully's dad, his head appearing on Boggs's body, and the same with Mulder, and it just cuts in and out of it. It's really unnerving, brilliant stuff. But yeah, it definitely has a very Silence of the Lambs feel, because of Scully obviously interacting with this serial killer, this really twisted, demented serial killer who's giving her information, and it doesn't go as far as Silence of the Lambs, as in the respect which Starling has for Lecter, probably because it's obviously an episode of TV and they don't have the time. But I think there is a little bit of that at the end, where Scully actually is talking about how Boggs' information actually saved her. Because at one point he's talking about that going to the chair is like his dark place, is his sort of version of hell. And then he's sort of taunting her a bit because he's talking about Mulder and her father going to the dark place. And she says, it may be your dark place, but it doesn't mean it's Mulder's or my dad's dark place. And actually, one of the scenes of the episode is her just storming in when she bases a development has happened, and she just thinks that Boggs is for it and like tricking them, and she just explodes on him, which is really great acting by Gillian Anderson. But that's the point where he turns the tables on her and he actually starts talking to her seemingly through her father from that point of view. And it's just a supercharged scene between them. But yeah, by the end of the episode, there is at least this belief from Scully that Boggs did something right. He actually does save her, because there's a particular bit of information when her and other FBI agents go to save the teenagers at this place from this serial killer. There's a particular information that actually stops Scully from getting killed and actually catching the serial killer. And I think what's good is, I think you can read it either way. I think there is this sense of humanity in Dourif's performance. As crazy as his character is, as twisted as he is, as much as he plays games with Scully throughout the episode, I think there is a read in that says that maybe he did want to do the right thing, and maybe on some levels there's like a respect for Scully, and he just wanted to do the right thing. She certainly gets drawn into that, and again, with Faith and everything being a theme of the episode, then maybe on some levels this is his redemption. But then he kind of turns that around on her again, very sort of twisted, because he then says, I know you tried to get me a deal. So there's a bit of respect, but he basically ends the scene by saying, I'm not going to give you, I know you want the message from your dad, but I'm not going to give it to you. You're going to have to come and see me tonight. You're going to have to come to my execution to get that message. Otherwise, you're not going to get it. So he is basically stringing her along and playing with her, using that power for right up to his death, for as long as he can. And the last decision by Scully is probably the most striking in the episode, because it certainly looks like she's going to go to that execution and look for his message, and we see him getting led to the chair and then like turn, well, I think he's getting electrocuted, but turn and look for Scully. So it appears as though he was going to give her the message, but she's not there, and she goes to see Mulder, and this actually is a really good cap off and a really good bit of storytelling, because it ends with her and Mulder in the hospital. And I think on one level it's the episode like saying she's been down the the dark path with Boggs, and it's basically taken her to a really dangerous, uncomfortable place. And now she's gone back and she's with, I mean, obviously not to say romantic things or anything, but the person she really respects. She's gone back to be with Mulder, and she's made that decision not to go to the execution, not to play Boggs's game. So it's almost like she's headed back to if you want to use a cliche, but the lighter path sort of thing, the right path by the end. And she's almost gone back to being a skeptic, because she says to Mulder at the end, then she's just too scared to believe in that stuff. But I think that just comes from the fact that it's such a personal thing for her with the father and the stuff that was brought up. So I think that's the idea, is that probably, because obviously there's been really strong evidence throughout the episode, but I think, yeah, in the end it's just that she's too afraid to believe, and she just wants to push that to the fringes. She doesn't want to deal with that stuff, which, considering what she's going through, is like completely understandable. And Mulder asks, well, don't you want to get that message from your father? And Scully's like, no, it's, I know exactly what he was going to say, because he's my father. And again, a nice little message, and just reiterating that no matter what, he's her father, so he loves her, and she doesn't need to deal with Luther Boggs to know that. She sort of already knows that. And I suppose in a way that's something her mother was trying to reiterate to her earlier on in the episode at the funeral. But fitting that we end with a Mulder and Scully scene to kind of cap it off, because obviously Scully's been through this journey, this struggle throughout the episode, and because of her getting involved with the Boggs stuff and Mulder being put in the hospital, they've been separated, and their sort of paths have like derailed throughout the episode, but then they come back together at the end. It's a really strong cap off, and the episode's strong throughout. There's not really a weak scene. I think this is an example of a pretty much a perfect X-Files episode all the way down. And boy, does Brad Dourif knock it out of the park. It's such a great, memorable performance and villain of the week. He's just the exact right level of evil, twisted, sinister. He's got a great presence, but at the same time, I think he does bring subtle moments of humanity. just immense stuff, and the scenes with him and Scully are just so memorable, so powerful, and I think this episode does so much for the Scully character. I think getting to know her family history a bit, and a bit more into her faith, but also where she is maybe now in being more open to believing stuff, it's really great stuff. And as I said, the role reversal stuff with her and Mulder was compelling to watch. So, very good episode. It's sort of funny this season because I think it is so up and down. There's some really great episodes like this and Ice, but some real stinkers as well, like Ghost in the Machine or Space. Some in the middle as well. So I think when you get an episode this great, it kind of stands out even more because this isn't the most consistent season. I think we have much more consistency to come in the seasons coming up. But this is a high point, not just of this season, but I think of the show. It is pretty much perfect. I'll give it 9 out of 10, and it edges just ahead of Space as my top of my X-Files list. So I will be back soon with the next episode, which is Gender Bender. I'll try to get that out in the next week or so, but please let me know your thoughts on this comments in the comments below. If you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. If you're a fan of the X-Files and want to keep these reviews coming and related sort of content, you can also get me up on Twitter at Keith Beard, simply if you look up Keith Beard on Twitter, and you can also ding the bell on YouTube to get more, well, notification when I go live on the live stream, but also when a new video comes up. But thanks, and I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.